Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. As a scientific coordinator of the Center of the Philosophy of Science of the University of Lisbon, it's my pleasure to welcome you and to open this session. This will be the first one of this seminar permanent on this kind, by Zoom. So the permanent seminar exists from 2003. It was created by Professor Olga Pombo, and it was interrupted in March, I believe, because of the situation that we are living. And now we will restart on this forum by a Zoom. The next 3 meetings are already public, and this is not the ideal situation to do a permanent seminar, but nevertheless, it's also a very good opportunity to open the permanent seminar to more researchers. The permanent seminar of our center, it was and it is aimed to create a meeting place between researchers that work in the Center for Philosophy of Science. But now we can not only do that, but also to open and to profit for collaboration, or to have the occasion to have other researchers to join us at this seminar. So the first speaker will be Bruno Jacinto. Bruno is our member since 2019. And it works in philosophy of mathematics, logic, and in metaphysics of science. I have to warn that the session will be recorded, but only Bruno's communication. So the part of Q&A will not be recorded. Our idea with these recordings, and we will start to record each of these sessions, is to create in the future a YouTube channel where these videos, these communications will be placed and be available to all. So that's the only thing I want to say. I don't want to bore anyone. And now I give the words to Sylvia. Sylvia.
Thank you, João. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I just wanted to tell that Bruno will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we will have time for questions. I will moderate the questions. I ask you to write your name, your full name, in the chat. So I will take note of the names, and I will call people to ask their questions by the order they register in the chat. This is it. So Bruno, I give you the floor, so to speak.
Thank you. First question. Okay, done. Hopefully, let me check whether you can. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be able to give this talk. As usual with these talks, it's work in progress. These are things that I've been thinking for a while now, and I would like to hear what you have to say on it. Before starting the actual presentation, I just want to call your attention to the link that you can find in the chat. There's a link to a handout where you can find the material that I'll be going through in the presentation. If you guys want to revisit some of the things I say, you'll probably have that information in the handout. Okay. So preliminary. So what are the questions that I want to address with this talk? Here's the first one. What are subjective degrees of belief? Another one, which might or might not seem to be related to the first one, is in what sense are norms epistemic as opposed to ethical or prudential? And finally, I want to think about what epistemic norms govern belief and subjective degrees of belief. So the approach that I'll be pursuing is the following. I'll take a view that I like quite a bit on the nature of belief and knowledge. And I will show that that account can actually, and surprisingly perhaps, be extended to an account of the content and degree of subjective degrees of belief and an account of epistemic normativity. And here's the motto. This is from Hannes Weizgeb. No normative epistemology of belief without the metaphysics and semantics of belief. So if you want to think about what norms should govern your reasoning, you should first of all figure out how the metaphysics of belief goes and how its semantics goes. And that's what I'll aim to do. So the first aim is to offer a novel, externalist conception of the content and degree of a credal attitude. That's graded account, what I will call the graded account. And on this account, subjective degrees of belief and beliefs will have the same underlying states. So some people think that the states of the mind on which you that determine that you have beliefs differ from the states of the mind that determine that you have subjective degrees of belief. A bit like the mind is kind of severed in two. On the account I'll give, there is no need to go through such complicated routes. The second aim to offer a novel conception of epistemic normativity, which I'll call the optimality account. The third aim is to formulate, on the basis of an account that will combine the graded and optimality account, so the account of subjective degrees of belief and epistemic normativity, a model theory. And the reason for formulating this model theory is to determine a novel logic of belief, knowledge, credence, epistemic obligation, and their interaction, whole in one. And the fourth aim will be to show some of the predictions of the resulting logic. In particular, I'll show some of the predictions with respect to the truth norm of belief, the knowledge norm of belief, the enkratic principle, and credence correlates of these. It's important to bear in mind that these are widely discussed principles in the literature. There are, as usual in philosophy, arguments back and forth with respect to their truth. And as will be seen, the theory I was proposing just immediately predicts the truth of all of them.
Bruno, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The presentation is still on the first slide. Is that correct?
No, thank you very much for.
Okay.
Okay, but in any case, let me see if can you guys see something now?
It's always on the title.
Okay, so let me, perhaps what I can do is do something easier. Okay, can you now see?
Yes.
What's going on? So there were a lot of slides, they've already passed, but as long as you followed me, we should be fine. So the structure of the presentation. I'll start by presenting the information-theoretic account of knowledge and belief. Then I'll show how to extend it to a novel account of credences of subjective degrees of belief. I'll also extend it to a novel account of epistemic normativity. I'll present the predictions of the account, of the two accounts, and then I'll conclude. So first, and now I'll need to introduce some notions. And the first that will need, perhaps the central one, is the notion of an information system. So an information system, think about the scale you have, a scale we have at home, a thermostat, almost whatever thing you can think about to behave as an information system. It's something that has internal states and has environmental conditions such that the internal states and environmental conditions of the information system are almost perfectly correlated. So in particular, under optimal conditions, the system is in state II. So for instance, it's in state I1, if and only if the environmental condition EI obtains, if and only if, for instance, the environmental condition E1 obtains. So here's an example. A kitchen scale. It has 100 different internal states. Each one registers 1, 2, 3, etc., up to 100 on its screen. And each internal state of the kitchen scale is systematically correlated with the environmental condition EI that occurs on top of the scale, weighing total I plus minus 0.5 grams. So you have the internal states, the states are registering a certain number registering a certain number, and the external condition of the object on top of the scale weighing having a certain weight. Under optimal conditions, the kitchen scale registers I if and if the objects on top of it weigh I plus minus 0.5 grams in total. And so the kitchen scale counts as an information system. So the notion of an information system appeals to the notion of optimal conditions. And it is important to have in mind what sort of thing are these optimal conditions. So these can be either conditions internal to the information system or external to the information system. And here's an example. So you can think that these are non-optimal conditions, not optimal conditions. So here are non-optimal conditions for the workings of a kitchen scale. So when its batteries are low, we know that conditions are not optimal for it to work. So when its batteries are not low, that's part of what it is for conditions for it to work, be optimal. There are also external conditions, such as the presence of magnets in the vicinity, for instance, below the scale, when the objects being weighed are attracted to the magnet. If you're weighing iron, these are non-optimal. This is a different sort of non-optimal condition for the working of the scale. And so when there are no such things in the vicinity, that's part of what it is for conditions to be optimal for the working of the kitchen scale. Okay, so now we've seen what sort of thing an information system is. The second notion I'll need is the notion of information carrying. An internal state of an information system, carries information that P, just in case conditions are optimal. The agent is in state I, internal state I, and under optimal conditions, the external state that corresponds to it obtains when we use P. Another example. Under optimal conditions, the state of the scale displaying I on its screen, 1, 2, 3, etc., up to 100, carries information that the objects on top of it weigh I plus minus 0.5 grams in total. Under optimal conditions, the scale displays I on its screen if only if the objects on top of it weigh I plus minus 0.5 grams in total. And trivially, under optimal conditions, the objects on top of the scale weigh I plus minus 0.5 grams in total if only if they weigh I plus minus 0.5 grams in total. So the external conditions that are perfectly, or that are under optimal conditions, perfectly correlated with the internal condition I of the kitchen scale, are such that imply a certain fact about the world. They imply themselves. And so the scale carries information that the objects on top of it weigh I plus minus 0.5 grams in total. Okay, so we've seen some definitions, and now I'm able to come to the first thesis that characterizes the information-theoretic account. And the idea is that we are more than, but also part of what we are is just that we are information systems that have internal states, and that our internal states turn out to be, some of them turn out to be belief states. So part of what it is for a state I as an agent to be a belief state is for the agent to be an information processing system that has I amongst their internal states. So the idea is, okay, we have a good model of devices that carry information about the environment, and belief, it would appear, or belief states, it would appear, are states that carry information about the environment. And so let us use this model to try and characterize things like us and what it is for us to have beliefs. So on belief states and kitchen scale states, the first thing to note is that this thesis that I've just presented to you, information belief states, is non-committal on whether all there is to belief states is that these are states of information carrying systems. So a different way of putting it is that information belief state is non-committal on whether things like kitchen scales are capable of being states of belief. Of course, we would like to say no, and we can make the account a bit stronger. It's for it to say that, look, things like kitchen scales do not have belief states. But we don't need to make the account stronger. All we have is that the account does not imply that kitchen scales have belief states. Different features that characterizes information-theoretic account. Informational belief. An agent believes that P just in case it is in some belief state, such that necessarily, if conditions are optimal and the agent is in that belief state, then the belief state carries information that P. So another example will be useful. Let's take our kitchen scale. Let's think about what happens when the object on top of it when it displays I on its screen. It will believe that the object, then it will believe in a certain attenuated sense of belief that the object on top of it weigh in total I plus minus 0.5 grams. And sorry, before proceeding, it will do so even if conditions are non-optimal. Even if the battery is low and the object is on top of it and it displays I on its screen, it will still believe in its attenuated sense of belief that the objects on top of it weigh in total I plus minus 5 grams. And now we get to a notion of optimal belief. What it is to optimal believe a proposition is just to believe it when conditions are optimal. And from here we get a very straightforward account of knowledge. An agent knows that P just in case she believes P in optimal conditions. So what is going on? So let's, or perhaps even better, let's think about what goes on under optimal and non-optimal conditions. So when conditions are optimal for the working of the kitchen scale and it displays I on its screen, it will know, in this attenuated sense of knowing, that the objects on top of it weigh in total I plus minus 0.5 grams. But when the scale has a low battery and displays I on its screen, it will still believe, but not know, that the objects on top of it weigh in total I plus minus 0.5 grams. And this is the information-theoretic account. It consists of a conjunction of informational belief state, informational belief, and informational knowledge. And for details on the account and for some people that have proposed it in the past, we can see papers by Stampe, Dretske, Stalnaker, and Millikan. Actually, Dretske and Stalnaker are books, not papers. Okay, so here's the idea, or one way of seeing how the information-theoretic account thinks about the relationship between belief and knowledge. So belief, to use a phrase by Timothy Williamson, is a kind of botched knowing. It is the most one gets when conditions fail to be optimal. An agent that believes that P is an agent that would have known that P if conditions were optimal. Okay, so now that we've seen what the information-theoretic account consists of, I want to tell you what some of its virtues and some of its vices too. I don't want to hide them. The first of its virtues is what people call belief holism. So the idea that change in a particular belief typically implies change in a number of other beliefs, similarly for knowledge. And this turns out to be predicted by the information-theoretic account. Here's an example of why beliefs seem to be holistic. By forming the belief, coming to know that it is raining in Lisbon, one also believes, comes to know that it is raining in Lisbon, in Portugal, it is not sunny in Lisbon, in order to walk around comfortably in Lisbon when we need an umbrella, and so on and so forth. So there are good reasons to think that belief is always in this way. If one just changes just a bit the belief one has, then immediately there is a change in a whole cohort of other beliefs. Different virtue of the account, implicitness. So according to the account, propositions believed need not be actively considered. Similarly for propositions known. And implicitness seems to be pervasive in the way we explain action via belief and desire. So we can think about some subject John and thinking why is he behaving the way that he is? Why is he steering left? So he's steering left because he believes that by steering left he will reach his destination on time. And we can think that when he's driving, he believes this, even though he has never considered the proposition that by steering left he will reach his destination on time. At least he has not considered that proposition at that time when he's steering. And as I mentioned, that beliefs are implicit is to suppose in ordinary beliefs are explanations of action. That John's belief and his desire to reach his destination on time trying to explain why he steers left, independently of whether he has entertained the proposition or not, the relevant proposition or not. And finally, the other virtue, at least I take it to be a virtue, is no complexity. So on the information-theoretic account, the complexity of a sentence need not imply complexity of belief or belief state. And it is good to have a view that is at least somewhat neutral on this, because it seems that at least some non-human animals have beliefs, or at least it seems reasonable to attribute beliefs to them sometimes. We may be wrong in the end, even though I, for one, don't think we are. In any case, this conception of belief afforded by the information-theoretic account allows us to understand and explain also the behavior of non-human animals. Okay, so much for the virtues. And now I want to consider the vices. The first one is unclear, is something that I just want to put away and say that I don't want to deal with it in this talk, and I don't think it is a problem for the use I am appealing to, for the use of the information-theoretic account that I'll be appealing to. So the problem has to do with solutions to the problem of intentionality. In the virtue of what, and this problem is a problem of figuring out in virtue of what are belief states, knowledge states, desire states about the world, as they seem to be. The information-theoretic account was originally proposed as part of a solution, of a naturalistic solution to the problem of intentionality. So why are our states about the world? The idea of the account, the way that people that have proposed the account try to offer a naturalistic solution to the problem of intentionality has been to think of information carrying as a natural relation. So states of very simple organisms, as well as of non-living objects, as kitchen scales, seem capable of carrying information, are capable of carrying information. If that's right, then it would appear that it is in virtue of carrying information about the world that they have these organisms or even non-living objects have intentional states, have states that are about the world, but having such states doesn't seem mysterious in any way. So here's the difficulty for the naturalistic project, for the information-theoretic account. It appeals to optimal conditions, to the notion of an optimal condition. Why is this a difficulty? Let's think about what happens with kitchen scales. Prima facie, it is us, with our intentions, that fix the optimal conditions for the working of kitchen scales. So it is because we are interested in figuring out the weight of objects that we fix particular conditions as being optimal for the working of kitchen scales. If our interests were different, we would fix other optimal conditions, and that would have different consequences. And just say before proceeding, and this is a problem because if it is us that fix the optimal conditions, it is us with our intentions that fix the optimal conditions, but our intentions are about states of the world. And so it seems that information carrying on its own doesn't allow us to explain away in a naturalistic way why intentional states are about the world, because we still need to understand what makes our intentions be about the world. So the present paper, or in this case, the presentation, is neutral on whether such a defense of the naturalistic character of the information-theoretic account is available. as I already mentioned. In particular, I do not think, I am uncertain on whether such a naturalistic account be had, because I am inclined to think that optimal conditions are contextually determined. So depending on the context, you may fix different optimal conditions for thinking about whether someone believes or knows certain proposition. But I don't want to go into this contextualist view on knowledge and belief. Now, we have bigger fish to fry. Okay, a different commitment of the information-theoretic account. So it predicts that belief and knowledge are closed in the necessary implication. So for instance, if necessarily, if P then Q, then the account will immediately predict that if I believe P, then I believe Q. I think that seems wrong. So if you think that the truths of mathematics are necessarily implied by directions, even more if we think that they're necessary truth, but let's just focus on this other case for now, then it would appear that we are committed to believe all the truths of mathematics just by believing its actions. Okay, so it is, as I've mentioned already, if closure under necessary implication, it is a commitment to the information-theoretic account, as I previously mentioned. But fortunately for our purposes, there are some weakenings of the information-theoretic account, or views that are very much aligned with information-theoretic account that are able to avoid this commitment. And I mentioned just two here. One of them is that belief states are fragmented, and the other one is that belief states are question sensitive. So what does it mean for belief states to be fragmented? The rough idea is that agents can be in more than one belief state at the same time. And what does it mean for belief states to be question sensitive? It means roughly something like the following: that what beliefs we have depends on what concepts we have for understanding the world. I am sympathetic to views of this sort, and so I think that the problem of closure by necessary implication can be put to the side. In what follows, I won't complicate the information-theoretic account in those ways, because again, what we'll have to see is just it's just tricky on its own. Finally, a different commitment of the account, one that I will also be committed to. If propositions are necessarily equivalent, then an agent believes one if only she believes the other. This is again a commitment of the information-theoretic account. I think that at least some counterexamples to this principle can be resisted. So I think that sometimes when people think that one believes a proposition while failing to believe a proposition that's necessarily equivalent to it, it is not quite right to say that what one believes and what one disbelieves are propositions that are necessarily equivalent. I think that there's some confusion about the description of belief in those cases. But I don't think that this can deal with all the counterexamples that have been put forward to closure and their necessary equivalence. I would like to deal with this problem, but I will have to leave this for another time. Okay. Now we are in a position to move to credences, the subjective degrees of belief, and see what we can say about them. So the first observation that I want to make is that, interestingly, Dretske, who is perhaps one of the main proponents of the information-theoretic account, has a notion of information carrying that is slightly different than the one I presented to you. So people nowadays tend to leave the notion that Dretske feels to the side, but I think it has more promise than people have been able to realize. So here's how Dretske defines carrying information. An internal state of an information system carries the information at P just in case conditions are optimal. The agent is in that state, and the conditional probability of P, given that the external conditions correlated with the internal state obtain, and that conditions are optimal, is 1. So when doesn't the agent believe that P, when does an information system carries the information at P, just in case the conditional probability of P, given that the environmental condition associated with the agent's internal state obtains, and that conditions are optimal, is 1. Okay, so you see that we have now 2 conceptions of carrying information. The one that I just presented to you, which is somewhat more standard nowadays, and Dretske information carrying. So how do they relate? Well, they turn out to collapse if and only if for every optimal world W, the probability of W is greater than 0. Strikingly, when the set of possible worlds that you are considering is infinite, it can be that you assign probability 0 to some possible worlds. Actually, it can always be that you assign probability 0 to some worlds, but these are particularly striking cases. But information carrying and Dretske information carrying collapse if and only if the probability of an optimal world is greater than 0. And so here's the idea. So how does one get an account of credences via information-theoretic notion and via this information-theoretic picture of knowledge and belief? Well, Dretske information carrying naturally gives rise to a graded conception of information carrying. Because we are going to a notion of conditional probability, we can think about values of conditional probability that are not extremal, that are neither 0 nor 1, in particular that are not 1. So the definition is as follows: an internal state I of an information system carries information P, that P to degree T, just in case conditions are optimal. The agent is in state I, and the conditional probability of P, given that EI obtains and conditions are optimal, is T. So whereas information carrying requires perfect correlation it requires that, not perfect correlation, apologies, which requires that P is necessarily implicated by the internal conditions that the agent is in under optimal conditions. Now we don't require a necessary implication. What we require is that the conditional probability of P be equal to T. So an example to make things a bit more concrete. Let's think about my kitchen scale again. So it registers 7. Let's assume that when conditions are optimal and my scale registers 7, the objects on top of it weigh in total 7 plus minus 0.2 grams around half of the time. And so this is what we're supposing. To be more precise, we're assuming that this is not something that's given by the observed frequencies, but in fact the probability of the weight of the objects on top of the scale being 7 plus minus 0.2 grams, given that conditions are optimal, and that the objects on top of my scale weigh 7 plus minus 0.5 grams, is 1/2. Then, when conditions are optimal, the internal state of the scale, the internal state that it is in, of registering 7, carries information that objects on top of it weigh in total in total 7 plus minus 0.2 grams to the degree 1/2. Okay. So what does graded information carrying tells us? It consists of the degree then to which a state of belief is optimally correlated with the state of the world. So you can think of belief as optimal correlation with a state of the world under optimal conditions. Whereas graded information carrying tells us something less than this optimal correlation. It tells us the degree to which it is optimally correlated. So this suggests that graded information carrying can provide afford the resources for accounting for when the subjective degree of belief of an agent in a proposition is T, and gives us a graded account. So here's my proposal. An agent has subjective degree of belief T, that P, if and only if she is in some state, belief state I, such that necessarily, if conditions are optimal and the agent is in that state I, then I carries information that P to degree T. The example, when the scale has a low battery and displays 7 on the screen, it has a credence of 1/2 that the algorithm on top of it weigh in total 7 plus minus 0.2 grams. And here's a slogan. Credence is potential degree of information carrying. So that's what credence amounts to. Okay. Interestingly, we saw that knowledge was optimal belief, but there's also a notion that arises in this framework of optimal credence of T. An agent has optimal credence of T that P, just in case she has credence T that P and conditions are optimal. So optimal credence is to credence what knowledge is to belief. There's been some recent literature and inspired by a book by Sarah Moss on probabilistic knowledge. What is understood by probabilistic knowledge in that context is somewhat different, but this gives us a notion of a notion that could just as well be called probabilistic knowledge. If you want, probabilistic knowledge then would be optimal credence. Credence at T under optimal conditions is probabilistic knowledge of T. But I don't want to make things more confusing, so I won't use the notion the phrase probabilistic knowledge to talk about optimal credence, and I'll just use optimal credence. Okay, and when conditions are optimal, then and the scale rises to 7, it has an optimal credence of 1/2 that has on top of it weigh in total 7 plus minus 0.2 grams. It will continue to have a credence of 1/2 that the on top of it weigh in total 7 plus minus 0.2 grams, even if credence, even under non-optimal conditions, when it rises to 7. But then the credence that it has will be non-optimal. So okay, now we have it, the graded account. It consists of the conjunction of the information-theoretic account with, there's an extra C there, with informational credence. Interestingly, then credence comes out as a kind of doubly botched knowing. Credence of 1 in P is the most one gets if conditions fail to be optimal, but in optimal conditions, our internal state fully tracks P. Credence less than 1 is the most one gets if conditions fail to be optimal, and in optimal conditions, our internal state fails to fully track P. Okay, so I said that this account was externalist. In what sense? In what sense is the proposal that I'm putting forward externalist? So the point concerns how to interpret the probability invoked in the definitions of Dretske information carrying and graded information carrying. There are 2 salient options. One is that notion, the probability is some is an objective notion, some form of objective probability. The other is that notion of probability is something like agents or speakers, the speaker of the context, your probability or prior epistemic probability. So it might be the probability with which the speaker came to be exposed to think about the world, or it may be the probability that epistemically best agents would turn out to have, and which one? And the question now is, which is the notion of probability that, or the interpretation of the probability being invoked that makes more sense? So Dretske took the invoked probability to be objective, and here's what he says. And what matters here is that we're talking about information systems, and what is the notion of information? What is the notion of probability that matters in order to think about information systems and the way that they're correlated with the world? It says the following: the transmission of information requires not simply de facto correlations, but the network of nomic dependencies between the condition at the source and the properties of the signal. The conditional probabilities defining the informational content of the signal are all determined by the lawful relation that exists between source and signal. Correlations are irrelevant unless these correlations are a symptom of lawful connection. So why think about objective probability? Why was Dretske thinking about it in that way? And one way of seeing what Dretske was up to is the idea that the laws of nature somehow determine this probability function. So why objective probability then? So here are some reasons. The conditional probability invoked reflects the reliability of the system's internal state in tracking a worldly condition. But whether the internal state is reliable in doing so is something that's independent of whether the system or its user takes it to be reliable. That's why when we're thinking about how kitchen scales work, how TVs work in carrying information about the whatever is sending the information, we need some notion of reliability that is more than just the probability that one ascribes to it being reliable. So let's now go to the thesis of externalism and internalism. First, externalism about belief and internalism about belief. In order to have a belief with a particular content, it is necessary to be related to the environment in the right way. That's what an externalist will say. Whereas the internalist will say that in order to have a belief with a particular content topology, it suffices to possess certain intrinsic properties. And it should be clear that the information-theoretic account is clearly externalist. It doesn't depend only on what's going on in the mind of the agent. It depends on whether what's going on in the mind of the agent, whether the internal state that the agent is in, is perfectly correlated or not with a certain external condition and the optimal condition. Externalism about credences. In order to have a credence with a certain content to a particular degree, it is necessary to be related to the environment in the right way. So this is just the analogous as externalism about belief, but it also talks about the degree to which one's credence is, to which one has a credence. Internalism about credences then is the following thesis. In order to have credences with a certain content and to a particular degree, it suffices to possess particular intrinsic properties. And again, it should be clear that the graded account is clearly externalist, provided that the notion of probability invoked in graded information carrying is objective. It is externalist because the environmental conditions that one is correlated to a certain degree are determined by a notion of objective probability, and so depends on more than just the internal states of the speaker. I will skip this observation. I want to briefly mention the virtues of the graded account. The first of them is holism, which is just inherited from the information-theoretic account. Implicitness, again, this is just inherited from the information-theoretic account. And no complexity, again, this is inherited from the information-theoretic account. I think I'm running short on time, so I'll just briefly proceed and present to you what I have to say about normativity. And this will be somewhat quick. So, interestingly, the information-theoretic account brings with it a notion which is a normative notion, the notion of optimality. So it establishes priorities between worlds where the optimal conditions obtain, and worlds where optimal conditions do not obtain. And these priorities between worlds, they are clearly epistemic. They concern the worlds in which the information system is working appropriately for carrying information about the environment. So this suggests that an interesting precisification of epistemic normativity may be formulated in terms of optimal conditions. And this gives rise to what I call the optimality account. According to it, it is epistemic theoretic that P, just in case it is optimal that P. That is, just in case P is true in all optimal worlds. Okay, so this gives rise to the extended account, which consists of the conjunction of the graded account and the optimality account. Predictions. I formulated, as I mentioned in the beginning, a model theory that tries to model the commitments of the extended account, and from which you can get predictions with respect to the truth of a number of principles involving knowledge, belief, credence, and epistemic obligation. I don't have the time to, and I was expecting not to have the time to go through the details, but for those interested, you can see these details in the handout that I've given in the link that you can find in the chat. So I will skip these slides and I'll just I'll just give an example. I have seen. Okay, sorry, there was something in the chat and I needed to check. Okay, so here's the idea. Think about this world that you can see where you have P, Q, and R as the actual world. Think about these divisions that you find with green lines and blue lines as divisions of the set of a world, and let us assume for simplicity that we only have 6 possible worlds. If worlds are in the same blue square, then they are worlds where the internal state in which the agent is the same in all those worlds. If worlds belong to the same division with a green line, so these are worlds where the same environmental conditions obtain. So here's what you can see then. The actual world W4 and W5 are worlds in which in which the agent is in the same internal state, which is different from the internal state in which the agent is in W1, W2, and W3. And we are assuming that the agent can only be in 2 internal states. The blue lines, so the blue arrows, the dotted arrows, then map the actual world to the worlds that are optimal, worlds where the agent is functioning optimally. And the numbers above each world give you the probabilities of each one of those worlds being the actual world, or to put it better, give you the objective probability of those worlds being the actual world. So you can see immediately that Q is true in all optimal worlds, and that means that the agent believes that Q. In all optimal worlds in which the agent is in the same state that he is in the actual world. And you can also see that the agent does not know that Q, and the reason is simply that in the actual world conditions, the actual world is not an optimal world, so conditions are not optimal. And you can also see that the agent does not believe P, as P is true in none of the optimal worlds in which the agent is in the same internal state that he is in the actual world. Furthermore, the agent has a credence in Q of 1, because Q is true in all the actual worlds in which the agent is in the same state that he is in the actual world. And for the same reason, his credence in P is 0. Finally, his credence in R is 1/2, because it is only one of the two worlds. It is one in the two optimal worlds that R obtains, and these two worlds have the same prior probability distribution. So you can see that the agent has no optimal credences at the actual world, simply because the actual world is a non-optimal world. And I won't go through the details, but it will turn out, the model will turn out to predict that the agent ought to believe that Q, and it is false that he ought to believe that R. And finally, it will predict that under optimal conditions, his optimal credence in R is of 0.5. So he ought to believe that his optimal credence in R is 0.5. Sorry, even better. It ought to be such that his optimal credence in R is of 0.5. Okay, some predictions. I'll try to breeze through these last slides. True form of belief. So I'm presenting to you some epistemic norms that have been widely discussed in the literature. The first of them is this one, the true form of belief, according to which one epistemically ought to believe that P only if P. And the second is the knowledge norm of belief, according to which one epistemically ought to believe that P only if one knows that P. And the truth and knowledge norm of belief are predictions of the model theory that I've just presented to you. Similarly, you can have what I've called an optimal credence norm, which says that one epistemically ought to have optimal credences. That seems right. And that's also predicted by the accounts that I've just presented to you, by the model theory that I've just presented to you, or that I've mentioned. Enkratic principles. So here are some interesting notions. Say that an agent is in a state of epistemic acrasia, just in case there is some proposition P such that she believes both that P, and she epistemically ought not believe that P. So she is in a weird state. So she believes that P, but she also believes that she ought not believe it, or at least she believes the conjunction P and ought not to believe that P. So the enkratic principle says that this weird state is one that one epistemically ought not to be. So one epistemically ought not to be in a state of epistemic acrasia. And lo and behold, the enkratic principle is also a prediction of the theory that I've mentioned to you. And finally, credal acrasia. An agent is in a state of credal acrasia, just in case there's some population P, such that she has a credence greater than T, that's P, and she epistemically ought to have a credence lower than or equal to T, that's P. So this is a bit like the correlate for credences of what we had for belief. So this principle of credal acrasia, because you have your credence in P and the conjoined with you ought to have a credence in P of less than T is greater than T. So if the credence in the conjunction is greater than T, the credence in T will also be greater than T. But you ought not to have that credence, at least that it would appear. And that's what the credal enkratic principle says. So it says that one epistemically ought not to be in a state of credal encrasia. And again, the theory that comes out of the extended account, the logical theory, predicts the truth of this credal enkratic principle. And I'll skip this part because I think time is up, and so I should conclude. So here are my contributions in this talk. I presented a novel account of epistemic normativity, formulated in terms of optimality. I also presented a novel externalist account of the content and degree of credal attitude. I presented a novel logic of knowledge, belief, credence, epistemic obligation, and direct direction. And finally, I've shown the predictions of this logic with respect to the truth of a number of widely discussed epistemic norms, which are presently discussed in the literature. Sorry, yeah, I should not have written that. And that's it.